Throughout our history, sports have served as an avenue for social change. History has shown that sports have helped push social change in terms of race relation, gender bias, gender roles, discrimination, and prejudice as a whole. A majority of us would agree in terms of gender bias, gender roles, and discrimination against women. We have come a long way, but we certainly still have a long way to go. Media coverage directly impacts our views and perceptions concerning the sports we watch. According to allyoucanread.com, out of 10 sports magazines and providers, Sports Illustrated finished number 1 in the most popular sports magazines or providers. In this podcast, we will dive deeper and analyze Sports Illustrated's coverage of women and women's sports. We took the study to Sports Illustrated's online articles and posed this question that drove the study. In what ways and how often are women depicted in Sports Illustrated online articles? Each day from March 1st, 2017 to March 22nd, 2017, I selected the first article published on sportsillustrated.com each day. In this 21-day study, I looked for 3 things. Number 1, is this article about a woman athlete? Number 2, if so, is the article positive, negative, or neutral? Number 3, what is the percentage of the 21 articles during the study about women athletes? Since we know that Sports Illustrated is the number 1 magazine and provider, according to allyoucanread.com, let's see how the media covers women's sports as a whole. According to Twin Cities Public Television, 40% of all athletes are women, but women athletes only receive 4% of all media coverage. That means out of 1,000 stories, only 40 of them would be centered around women's sports. Let's hold on to this statistic and compare it with the findings of our study later in the podcast. According to humankinetics.com, Sports Illustrated was published in 1954. The magazine would become the most recognized, widely read periodical in the English language and would have a dramatic influence on public perceptions of what was important in the world of high performance, professional, and amateur sport in the latter half of the 20th century and now into the early part of the 21st century. Although when it comes to women, Sports Illustrated is known for its sexualization of women in Sports Illustrated swimsuit model editions. According to Forbes, the swimsuit model edition first debuted in 1964, 10 years after Sports Illustrated debuted, and ever since has been flying off the shelves. This is another thing to keep in mind. Now that we spoke about the history of Sports Illustrated, let's talk about our study. For my study, I most certainly covered women's sports, but in the 21 articles I did cover, I made sure to note which sports received coverage. I divided the 21 articles I covered, 1 article per day in the 21-day study, by subcategories. The subcategories were organized by sports. Out of the sports that showed up in the 21-day study, there were men's basketball, men's soccer, women's soccer, football, baseball, the swimsuit model edition, horse racing, men's NCAA basketball, women's NCAA basketball. A lot of people would say that the swimsuit model edition isn't a sport, but I included it in there for statistic reasons and how often it came up in the 21 articles. So when I look at the percentages, I will include that and then I will exclude that. So out of 21 articles, 15 articles were about men, and 6 articles out of the 21 articles were about women. 4 articles were about men's basketball. 0 articles were about men's soccer. 0 articles were about women's soccer. 4 articles were about football. 3 articles were about baseball. 5 articles were about the swimsuit model edition. 1 article was about horse racing. 3 articles were about men's NCAA basketball. And 1 article was about women's NCAA basketball. So out of the subcategories, the swimsuit model edition was the articles that came more frequently. When you break down the percentages, and this is including the swimsuit model edition, 71% of the articles were about men and 29% of the articles were about women. Now, if you take out the swimsuit model editions, only 5% of the articles were about women. Articles about swimsuit models were 24% of the articles in the study. According to Quartz Media, the coverage of women's sports has been steadily decreasing. Women's sports are covered less now than in 1988. Also, according to Quartz Media, they have a graph that is titled U.S. Sports Coverage on SportsCenter and Local Network Affiliates. This graph was conducted and created in 2014. So this graph breaks down sports coverage by sport, very similar to my graph. So as you see on this graph, men's basketball is covered 35.5%, men's football is covered 20.1%, men's baseball is covered 18.8%, men's other sport is covered 6%, men's golf is covered 5.3%, men's hockey is covered 5.5%, men's soccer is covered 4.1%, women's basketball is covered 2.3%, and women's other sport is covered 0.5%. So altogether, women's sports are accounted for 2.8% out of the 100% you see on this graph. So what does this all mean? Though we have a small sample size, we now see how often women are covered and depicted in Sports Illustrated. It's interesting, most of the articles I read were about women, but also feature the sexualization of women. According to the Huffington Post, women's swimsuit model magazines account for 10% of all Sports Illustrated's revenue. According to Jezebel.com, between the year 2000 and the year 2011, only 4.9% of all Sports Illustrated covers featured a woman athlete. According to ValleyAdvocate.com, in the past 10 years, only 20 covers in Sports Illustrated have exclusively featured a woman. According to TheAtlantic.com, the primary way to get on the Sports Illustrated cover is to, quote, be a cheerleader or be a model. Now that we know how one of the most famous sports magazines and media functions, it leaves us with the question, are we okay with how things are the way they are? Or are we going to act to change it?